Landlords of Reddit, what are your tenants from hell stories? When I was a little kid, my parents bought a cheap house in a neighboring town and fixed it up to rent. Two young women moved in and were great. Just out of college, working entry level and kind of getting by, no trouble. They called at 6 p.m. on Christmas Eve because there was a spider. My dad called back when we got home from church service and asked what they wanted him to do. They said they wanted him to end it, so he went out on Christmas Eve to end their spider. They seemed to think this was normal, like about on par with what you'd expect from your landlord. The least he could do given the situation. Not a horror story by any stretch, but it makes me laugh. He told me I wasn't allowed to move out until I could end my own spiders, because screw that. Story 2. My dad owns quite a few apartment buildings throughout Colorado. One summer while I was in college, he was in between managers for one of his 80-unit properties, so I acted as stand-in manager until he hired a new one. I can't say she was a worst tenant, per se, but I definitely have a few funny stories surrounding one woman named Kate. One day we were served a notice that Kate was taking us to small claims court. Why? Well, because her in-unit washing machine wasn't working. Had she reported the problem to management? No. The maintenance man and I entered the unit that afternoon to fix the washing machine. And the problem? It was unplugged. Same summer, my dad awakens me at 2 a.m. saying the local police is at the apartment on a shots fired report. When I arrive at the apartment, the place is lit up like Christmas with squad cars. There must have been like 20 officers at the scene. What prompted the call? Kate and her friend were walking back from the bars, hammered. They heard 2 loud pops and decided someone was firing at them. What actually happened? 2 guys launched a bottle rocket from a nearby balcony. Also worth noting, this happened on the 4th of July. From what I know, Kate is still a tenant. I can call my dad and get some more Kate stories if anyone is interested. 2 other entertaining stories from when I was growing up are these. When I was young, my dad owned 3 duplexes in a row. One winter, around 95, I believe, he noticed that the energy bill for one of the units was exorbitantly higher than the other units. He was curious about their energy consumption and paid a visit to the property one day while the tenant was at work. I clarified with my dad, and he gave the tenant notice 24 hours prior he was coming to perform an annual checkup of the fire alarms. He entered the basement and stumbled upon hydroponics galore. He said that there were over 30 weed plants, each with their own UV lamp and watering system. While weed is legal in Colorado now, well, it certainly wasn't 21 years ago. He told the tenant that he would be entering the basement in 2 days with a maintenance man to perform routine boiler maintenance, and when he returned in 2 days, the plants and hydroponics were gone. Growing up, my dad always told me you could identify a grow house from a mile away, because it was the only house in the block that didn't have snow on its roof. And the second story, my dad leased 2 or 3 units to the local Mormon church at the 80-unit apartment complex I helped manage for a summer. The idea was the church would house their missionaries in my dad's units while they completed the mission. As a result, the apartment inhabitants would rotate every year or so. Well, one rotation, my dad had a particularly un-Mormon batch of Mormon missionaries. This batch threw ragers, so loud the noise could be heard 4 buildings away. They were also known to frequent the local escort services and associated drug scene. As you may imagine, my dad had quite the uphill battle to fight when it came to addressing the missionaries' extracurricular indiscretions with the Mormon church. I do believe he eventually successfully evicted them though. Edit. I talked with my dad and, yeah, more Kate stories. Unfortunately, she did move out last summer though. The unit that Kate lived in was townhouse style, with the first floor consisting of a 1-car garage and a staircase leading up to the living area. My dad's manager was posting a few available units on Craigslist when she happened upon another curious posting. Kate had posted the garage for rent on Craigslist, under the premise that someone could live in the garage and they would be able to come upstairs to use the kitchen and restroom. The manager immediately marched over there to notify Kate that her posting violated the lease, which specified no subletting, as well as Colorado Housing Code, which specifies a maximum occupancy of 2 people per bedroom plus 1. Kate lived in a 1-bedroom with her husband and child. Kate was unable to comprehend what the manager was saying. She just kept repeating, "But think of all the extra money we could make each month." My dad said she simply could not wrap her head around the fact that her idea was violating a legally binding agreement and state housing code. They had to get her husband involved to have her remove the post. Kate called on Christmas Eve one year complaining that the heat would not turn on. Well, my dad is a good guy and doesn't screw around with things like tenants being without heat, so he immediately got up from the holiday dinner with extended family to fix her problem. The issue? The breaker for the HVAC system was flipped. When tenants come into the office to pay rent, my dad always offers them water or iced tea. One of his tenants accepted, opened the fridge, and grabbed one of the beers my dad has in there. Now, without fail, he always grabs a beer when he drops off his rent check, which makes my dad chuckle. My dad is buddies with one of the local mailmen. Whenever he has a tenant that screws him over by trashing the apartment or moving out in the middle of the night, the mailman will tell my dad their new address. My dad gives the mailman a gift certificate for a steak restaurant and a nice bottle of whiskey for Christmas every year. They've had this arrangement for about 10 years now. Okay, first things first, insanely long post, OP. You had a surprising amount of stories for this. And second, my favorite is absolutely the non-Mormon Mormons. The idea that they're going out, hiring escorts, and getting absolutely destroyed on drugs every night while on a Mormon mission? I don't know what to call it, I think that's right. Anyway, that's hilarious to me. Story 3. I have a couple tenant from hell stories. In 2007, an older couple decided to quit paying their rent, but they had pretty good excuses, so I didn't evict them until after 3 months of not paying. Finally went down to the courthouse to file an unlawful detainer on them. We finally had our day in court. The female, who is usually dressed nicely with fake nails and an expensive weave, showed up looking like an old hag. The guy was using a walker, and by the way, didn't need one. They claimed I was a slumlord and never fixed anything, but I had receipts from every repair, including a new AC unit. After I got the judgment against them, I tried to garnish the man's wages, was told he worked for Coca-Cola Co., and it turns out they'd never heard of him. After a little digging, I found out they'd both been arrested for selling coke. The officer showed me mugshots dating back to the early 80s. Oh, also, they stole the fridge. This past summer, I had a family of 7 move into a 5-bedroom house. They paid their deposit and first month's rent. That's it. Haven't seen another dime from them since. To top it off, they didn't get the power switched into their name, so I got a $400 plus power bill. About a month ago, I called the water company, and turns out they never had the water turned on, so they've been stealing water. The water company pulled the meter. I'll be the one paying to have it put back. When I gave a 24-hour notice to do a walkthrough with the police present, the woman answered the door and told me, "You can't come in, and we'll get out when you follow all the procedures and the sheriff kicks us out." I think they've done this before. Story 4. This happened to my friend's rental. Guy gets evicted. Instead of trashing the place, this guy freaking cut off chunks of drywall, put dead fish in the walls, and sealed it back up. Tenant was a carpenter. The owners couldn't figure out the smell for weeks. They repainted, got it professionally cleaned a few times, searched endlessly. Eventually, they figured something died in the walls and started knocking holes in the wall. Turned out to be that piece of crap move by the tenant. Okay, yes, bad, shouldn't do it, is very disrespectful in a lot of things, but that's kind of good, right? That's a little bit, at least a little good. Like, man, absolutely got them. Would that technically be considered some sort of crime? Probably. Story 5. I have a crazy/manipulative tenant. She looks after the place well, but I wonder if the psychological damage is worth it. Early on in the tenancy, she complained about the shower curtain sticking to her. It's a shower over bath setup. And since she pays her rent reliably and keeps the place clean, we thought, oh, okay, what the hell, and paid to have a glass screen put in. We specifically instructed that the glass screen go in front of the shower head, as any sane person would. After it's installed, I get a complaint from her about how she has to turn the shower head 45 degrees to stop the water from hitting the ground. I go to inspect it and find the glass is inexplicably at the other end of the bath. Turns out she'd insisted that the installer ignore our instructions and put it there for whatever reason. I don't know. I told her that since she countermanded our instructions on something we were paying for that was now a permanent fixture in our property, she was bloody lucky we didn't charge her for it, and that she was going to have to live with the setup she insisted on. She asked if she could put a cat flap in the back door, and we agreed. On the provision, she pay for it herself. See, we're learning. And that it be a proper cat flap, not some home dodgy version. She puts in a rubber flap cat door, which I personally wouldn't have gone with, but hey, whatever. She's happy, we let it go. Little did we know what that was leading towards. After the first winter in the house, she emails us copies of her electrical bills and says the house needs better heating because her bills are too high. Looking at the bills, we agree her house must need better heating, and we invest in a 7 kilowatt Daikin split system. She tries to tell us where to put it, and we tell her the installers have designated spot X as the most effective, and that we're not open to alternatives. We instruct the installers to refuse to shift the unit, learning once again, to another location unless they deem it to be superior, because she's not paying for it, we are. After the installation, the installer says to us, "Hey, just to let you know, the reason our bills were so high last year is that she pulled the cat flap into the open position and left it hooked up that way all winter." Yes, she created a deliberate hole between inside and out, left it fully open for an entire season, then complained that her heating wasn't effective. Also, she could score an expensive new heater that wasn't required. At this point, I started thinking, is she really that manipulative? Would anyone deliberately freeze themselves to make me fork out a few $1,000s for new heating? Is it really that important for her to screw me over for no purpose? Surely not. Surely not. Next, she asked permission to get a dog. Oh, we said sure. She then told us she'd purchased a puppy and it would be ready in 3 months. Oh, but hey, that side fence needs replacing or else he'll get out. That fence would have needed replacing within 7 or so years anyway, so we figure, okay, that's probably not entirely unreasonable. We agree. We're not keen on the way she's manipulated things by getting us to agree to a pet and then using that to pressure us, but we take the attitude that if we get the fencing job over with now, it's done. Won't be a problem later. Then she says that the neighbors are druggies, and so she wants the fence extended down the driveway to stop them hovering near her car. We can see her point. The neighbors are definitely not the greatest and constantly are in trouble with the police. Fair enough, we think, so we'll look into doing that as well. The druggies are evicted a few days later, hurrah, and social services put the house up for sale. We put the fence on hold until the sale goes through. A nice bloke buys the house and starts renovating it for his family. Great guy. We replaced the fence at our expense, and he helped with the labor. However, we're not learning fast enough. In fact, we're total freaking idiots. Seems now she's not getting the dog after all. The dog ploy was sufficient to get the fence replaced, so no dog necessary now. She has a shiny new fence, oh, but no, she's not happy. She wants that fence extension put in. But, we point out, the new guy is a quiet family man and no threat to anyone. There is no need for a fence extension, so we won't be putting one in. You have a brand new fence, be happy. She is not happy. She sends me a text about a week later saying that she really needs the fence extension put in because, and I quote, "The police are all over and there's dead bodies in the street." As you can imagine, I'm floored by this. Aside from the now long evicted criminals, the house is in a nice street, mostly populated by retirees. It is not by any stretch any kind of ghetto. I ring the new neighbor to confirm and he says, no police anywhere, and the street is, as usual, quiet. He questions whether my tenant is schizophrenic. God knows, maybe. I think more likely she's just compulsively manipulative, because she's got a very clear endgame in all of this, and she's showing remarkable dedication to coming up with complete bullcrap to achieve it. But anyway, back to the police in the streets and dead bodies everywhere. Turns out there was an accidental carbon monoxide death of 2 people on a boat moored at the nearby bay, and police were attending the accident. No crime. Nothing but a tragedy a couple of blocks away, which was being attended to very respectfully by the authorities. I tell her that no fence extension is going to be forthcoming. End of story. Or so I thought. Few weeks later, she tells me she needs the fence extension because the neighbor's gate keeps swinging into her driveway and hitting her car. I pop around to speak with the neighbor because God knows I can't trust a single word that comes out of her mouth. And while I'm there, he demonstrates that, lo and behold, the gate cannot in any way enter her driveway. Even in a gale, even if he swung it real hard, it cannot enter here or there. It cannot enter anywhere on her property because the gate is inset from the end of the fence. Literally no way for it to swing past that point. At this stage, I told her through gritted teeth that I have spoken with the neighbor and that her car is safe from his gate. In the 3 years she's been with us, she hasn't had a rental increase, and she's always paid a substantially under market rate because it was more important to me to get someone who looked after the property than to get the best price for it. However, the very next time I get some made-up psychotic bullcrap from her that's designed to manipulate me into yet another expensive and unnecessary upgrade, her rent is going to suddenly go up to market comparable. If I have to put up with any more of her crap, by God, she's going to start paying for it. And if it means that she moves on and I take my chances with a new person, oh, then so be it. I've already checked with the tenancy tribunal here, and I can put the rent up by $50 a week to match the market rate without them so much as blinking. And that's just to make it market comparable with the houses that don't have new fences and expensive heating. She's gone radio silent for a few months now. I hope maybe she's finally worked out that what she is on is a ridiculously sweet deal, and she should quit while she's massively ahead. I feel like of every thread I've read so far, this has the longest post by far. This is only story 5, by the way. I don't know how far we're into this video, but 5 stories in whatever time it's taken, I'm sure is absurd. landlords have a lot to say apparently. Anyway, from the sounds of things, OP is a very accommodating landlord. And well, I'll be honest, completely upfront about my views. I have some gripes with landlords in general. I think it would be a little better if they were all a little more like OP. I'm sorry that you have to deal with this tenant from hell, OP. You have been extremely patient. Story 7. Tenant rented an apartment that doesn't come with a parking space. An apartment in the building that did come with a parking space came available. He asked if he could have it. I told him it would be whatever extra per month. He then started posting propaganda all over the property about the injustices I had supposedly committed for not giving him a parking space for free. He tried to get other tenants to sign a petition that would make me give up my parking space on the property, and then he took us to court. Oh, he lost. But not without just a freaking nightmare of his little crap of a personality and sociopathic tendencies. The most annoying aspect of it all was the fact he was this bullcrap hippie dude who was all about peace and positivity vibes and teaching yoga and stuff. Wrong him, though, and he was the most toxic human you'd ever meet. Story 8. Used to have a job that involved cleaning and minor repairs of rental apartments and houses between tenants. Usually it was easy enough, but the ones who were evicted often made it a point to wreck the place on the way out. One particular jerk decided to pack plumber's putty into the sink and bathtub drains, then turn on the taps before he left. They had to get professional contractors to fix most of it, but I got to rip out a bunch of stinky wet carpet and water-damaged floorboards. Story 9. My parents had some tenants when I was probably 7 or 8 that never paid the rent, and they wound up getting evicted. My parents decided that they would save some money and we would just clean the place up ourselves. That was the worst idea ever. I didn't know what a lot of the stuff I saw that day was until much later in life. The first thing I saw when we walked in the door was a fish tank full of dead exotic fish. In the bedroom, we found used rubbers, used tampons, and used needles. Like, just lying around. Once we saw that bedroom, my parents gave up and hired a cleaner. But I heard what else they found. They found a cat shoved into the toilet of the master bathroom. It was terrible. Edit. For those wondering, my parents did report them for animal abuse/neglect. Unfortunately, nothing came of it. Story 10. Used to work in lettings. We had a young couple move into a house. They were young and were using benefits to pay their rent, but the landlord wanted to give them a chance. 2 months later, we got a call from a locksmith contracted by the police. The police had raided the house the night before because the young man was a drug dealer. They had literally smashed the front door frame out the wall, and the locksmith had been called in to make good. We called the girl. The young man was in police custody and she couldn't afford the rent and wanted out of both the tenancy and the relationship. We made a house visit to check the state of the door. It was pretty bad. They had a dog in a house with a no pets policy, and it had been shut in the bedroom a lot. Feces and chew marks/scratch marks everywhere. And they had smoked, no smoking policy, and the house stunk of stale cigarettes. The landlord agreed to let them out of the tenancy and get the house back on the market. It cost thousands to put the house right. New front door, redecorate all new carpets. It was just about ready to advertise when we had a call from the neighbor. There had been a disturbance the night before and he had to call the police. The young man, upon being released from police custody and unable to get back with his girlfriend, had broken back into the property a couple of days earlier to squat. He then had a visit from his supplier he owed a lot of money to. His supplier ended up stabbing him. He almost bled to death on the brand new cream carpets. Once we'd got more new carpets in and fixed the broken window from where he'd broken in, we found a new reputable tenant. A nice young man who was actually a drug counselor, which turned out to be good, because a lot of the local addicts didn't get the memo about their dealer being arrested and then stabbed, so he had a lot of visitors in the beginning and he knew how to deal with them. Also, another woman with mental health issues tried to end both herself and her kids by burning the house down. They all got out alive and she got help. Oh, and another guy threatened to end me because he owed rent and couldn't pay and I made him feel guilty. He got a visit from the police, with me knowing where he lived and all. Story 11. 2-bedroom unit. Rented to 2 girls. Grown woman, mind you, with jobs, etc. Complained there were roaches. Previous tenant had no roach problem. We'd even cleaned it, and so none. We get it taken care of, and still complained there were more. Now we're thinking she or her roommate brought them. Skip to them both leaving on October 31st. We get the key and check the unit, and it is trashed. They left most of their garbage behind. Bottles on the counter, glasses, plates, cutlery, clothes, shoes, food, all over the place. And roaches, of course. Lots of them. We call junk removers and they don't remove unless it's roach-free. Called pest control. They advise to remove the things before they do their jobs. FML. Story 12. My parents have owned properties for a while, so there are a number, but the one that I'm personally invested in is the last tenant. They decided to rent out my childhood home, and I suggested it to a coworker. I had worked with this woman for several years and thought that she and her family were decent people. I trusted them. They brought bed bugs into the place, did quite a bit of damage to the walls. They also pulled out and sold a 100-year-old hardwood trim, removed the central air unit and sold it, and generally screwed the place up. They then proceeded to skip town after being kicked out once they found out that their wages were being garnished. Show up to your court dates, kids. Having tenants leave behind piles of trash, horrifying bathrooms, and holes in the walls is common, but I hold a bit of a grudge on this one specifically. Yeah, essentially being betrayed by people that you kind of knew and trusted, that sucks. The bedbugs thing, probably not their fault. Like, they wouldn't do that intentionally. But all the rest of it, like, come on, man. And then skipping a court date and then skipping town, crazy. These people were not out to play by the rules. Story 13. When I was a teenager, my family rented our downstairs unit to a small family. Nothing crazy happened, but the mom annoyed the crap out of me. My bedroom was right above theirs, and she was constantly calling my parents to complain about noise. Oh, and when I say noise, I mean the faint sounds of someone walking down a hallway or some other BS. My parents decided to accommodate them by purchasing a rug to line our hallway and making it a rule for me to not be on the phone or up and about after 10 p.m. But even after all that, she still found something to call about. Like, how the hell are you going to complain about someone walking normally down a carpeted hallway? Keep in mind, we've had several tenants in that unit before they moved in. None complained once about the noise. Once I was up late in my room watching TV and the remote rolled off my bed, hitting our hardwood floor. I immediately grabbed it to mute my TV, but moments later, what do you know? Our home phone starts ringing at 1 in the freaking morning. The mother called about the loud noise she just heard and felt compelled to complain about it, even though it lasted less than a second. This type of scenario happened all the time, and at the end of their lease, they moved out. We then rented the unit to another family and never heard any more noise complaints. Good freaking riddance. Story 14. I was a landlord when my girlfriend moved in with me, and she had an empty condo. First 2 renters were fine, but then there was Kevin. Kevin was a single male, good income, seemed like the perfect tenant. We get into month 3 and the rent checks stop coming in. So we go to the condo to find out what the big deal is. First off, there's a nice new flat screen TV, but no furniture, and a giant bean ball chair. We ask, where the hell's the money? Kevin looks frantically through his Bible and is all like, I lost the money order, sorry. Upset, we do a little more looking, and it turns out he has a roommate, a silent, muscular black man. Okay, whatever, but if you have a roommate, you gotta tell us, Kevin, so we can put him on the lease. Long story short, Kevin stays silent, and a few days later we come by to serve him papers and to begin the eviction process. Kevin's no-named roommate turns out to be a convicted assaulter who is out on parole. That's great and all, but we're right across from a school. Kevin was violating offender legislation. Thank God he left without much of a fight, and we were able to dump the condo at a modest profit. Okay, so first of all, OP, kick him out, being upset by all this, yeah, super fair. Dude should not have been that close to a school, or, I don't know, anyone in my opinion, but yeah, that is a wild, wild situation. Aside from that, just a note, though, there was no need to mention that he was black. Like, that didn't come up once in the story. You just said it for no real reason. Anyway, just want to point out, that was weird, man. Story 15. Was renting a house and subletting a room to an 18-year-old couple. Real nice, considerate, devout Christians. Had to leave for 2 weeks and asked them to clean the house spotless, so we could get the security deposit back and, in turn, pay them for the trouble. Came back a couple days early to find they had completely trashed the entire house, like crack den status. Moved the mattress down into the living room, including our TV, went through all of our stuff and incorporated it into their stuff, adopted 2 cats 2 days after we left, no pets, by the way, kitty litter in every square inch of carpet, used rubbers everywhere, the whole house smelled like cigarettes, no smoking, pawned off our $800 drum set and $200 bong, and stole most of my sentimental keepsakes I had in a small box since I was a child. Cops were called and they were in the green legally. Proceeded to pack up whatever they wanted, including our stuff, and left with their parents who didn't care what their kids had done. Screw Reno, Nevada. Story 16. Not a real landlord, but I was/am renting a room to my girlfriend's friend since she got kicked out of her old place. She lost her first job within a week of moving in, got a new job, and used a guy as a sugar daddy, buying her smokes, weed, booze, clothes, and he apparently wanted more, so she quit that job, got another job as a custodian, got fired within a month for refusing to work her scheduled shifts, then went on to welfare. This whole time she hasn't bought anything for the apartment. That means toilet paper, soap, etc. She is also lazy as all hell, leaves all the lights on when she leaves, never cleans anything but her room, throws full bags of garbage onto the not full garbage in the kitchen, saw her put 3 bags on top of each other once, and I confronted her about leaving everything on all the time a few months ago. Today I come home to a passive-aggressive note about leaving our fan on in our room. She proceeded to scream at me, try her hardest to make me mad at my girlfriend, telling me she wanted to leave me, blah blah. Every time I proved her wrong, she changed the subject to continue yelling. Ended up throwing my Xbox onto the floor and threatening me with violence if I moved her stuff out of her room when she left. I now have my second indoor lock in place, waiting for her to come home and start crap to call the cops. Or tomorrow I'm getting my landlord to change the locks. And then I'm going to move all her stuff by the dumpster in the back. Edit. In my province, I'm 100% within my rights to remove her belongings and kick her out. Thank you for the concern, though. I'm so glad a lot of people are attempting to stop me from screwing myself over. Update. Got the locks changed, no problem. Phoned the local police inquiry line to make sure we know our rights, and the police lady told us we're good. Completely covered if any further problems come up. And we can also request an officer to keep the peace when she comes to get her stuff. So far, she's refusing to cooperate and pick a date and time to get her stuff. We can give her a few days to pick a date and time, and if she refuses or doesn't show up, her property is considered abandoned. Story 17. We had one tenant who wouldn't pay rent. We followed the protocols to evict him, but he kept getting the judge to agree to an extension. He ended up staying rent-free for 7 months. He also complained about anything and everything. The neighbors are too loud. Someone's car alarm went off across the street. One of the neighbors has a cat and I'm allergic. Literally nothing I can do in any of those situations. When he finally got evicted, he left the apartment in shambles. Holes in the walls, curtains stained with what I can only assume was crap, and the rug was littered with cigarette burns. I wouldn't wish someone like that on my worst enemy. Story 18. Not a landlord, but used to work for my stepfather when he had a business cleaning out and renovating apartments and houses where particularly bad tenants had been evicted / their lease ran out, and on moving out, left most of their garbage behind. Here are some of the worst things I saw when doing that. Big old Victorian-style house in a nice neighborhood. On moving out, they left literally a foot-thick pile of clothing covering the entire basement floor, which would have been fine if the pipes weren't also leaking. So most of the clothes were sopping wet and molding. Another large house, though in a less nice neighborhood. Dirty diapers left everywhere, some wrapped up in old shopping bags, but a giant pile of them left sitting in the closet of what was obviously the child's bedroom. Townhouse-style apartment. One of the rooms had several fist-sized holes in the wall, and other rooms had obviously bad patch-up jobs done, and whomever had been making the holes decided it would be a great idea to use the holes as garbage receptacles. Had to tear out all of the walls just to make sure we got all of the trash. Middle-sized house. Tenants had left lots of food in the house and power had been cut more than 2 months before they were actually evicted. The place smelled worse than the diaper place once the fridge was opened, as it revealed 5 gallons of spoiled and rotting milk, as well as several large packages of meat and other rotting foods. And this last one made me sad. Small but a nice house in a very well-off suburban neighborhood. Was being rented by guys who actually lived out of state, but would use it as a party house and drug den when they wanted to party or fell off the wagon. Trash, broken furniture, clothing and drug paraphernalia everywhere. Lots of tiny bags of various drugs, unmarked medication bottles half full of pills, needles hidden all over the place, walls with holes or completely caved in, mold and mildew everywhere. While cleaning out a room, went to empty out a desk to make it a little easier to get out to the dumpster and found tons of handwritten letters to one of the guys. They were from his wife and children, all begging for him to get sober and be in their lives again, including pictures drawn by what I assume was a small child with crayon and markers. While I have no doubt that business probably does pretty well, I do not envy whatsoever working it. Having to clean up the trash that people have purposefully left behind and may have been neglected for months is not my idea of fun. I'm sure it's someone's though, and to those people, Godspeed. Story 19. I was a maintenance guy for a beyond screwed up apartment building. I lived there with a girlfriend and served as the maintenance guy in exchange for a big rent decrease. There is way more as to how we remained in this building, but it's worth mentioning that after a while, we were the only tenants who were not living off of government assistance / SSI / other disability. I'm just gonna go down the list. Krusty, a Vietnam vet. I never knew his real name, but his girlfriend always referred to him as Krusty because he bore an uncanny resemblance to Krusty the Clown. He got in trouble multiple times for climbing out his window trying to install surveillance cameras on the ledges of the building. He was insanely paranoid, and police were once called because he was crawling around the front lawn of the building with a loaded shotgun. Randy, another Vietnam vet, and perhaps the saddest case of severe PTSD I've ever witnessed firsthand. He was seemingly a normal guy, though really tall. He was lanky and easily 7 foot or more. He'd walk all around the block smoking those cheap King Edward mini cigars, and was generally really friendly. But something about certain types of vehicles triggered him. He'd go into an animalistic fit, running around on the busy 4-lane avenue we lived on, barking and screaming nonsense at cars and waving his arms. Amazingly enough, we figured out that all it took to snap him out of it was walking up to him and happily saying, "Hi, Randy." If you approached him and said that with a smile, he was instantly back to normal, completely unaware that he'd nearly avoided being hit by a city bus seconds earlier. He seemed to be in his mid-50s or so, and had a brother who was there frequently looking after him. He eventually was put into a home due to his mental issues, and we were tasked with cleaning his place out. We walked in and found knee-high garbage covering the floor of every room of his 2-bedroom apartment. It remains the only time that the real estate company, who owned numerous buildings in the city, paid for outside cleaners to handle an apartment. It was basically a biohazard at that point. Mr. R. For a few months, he served as a sort of interim landlord when things with the owners were in a shake-up. He was Romanian with not a good grasp of English, and he generally had his son with him to translate. He was eventually arrested for going into people's apartments without the required notice, and several tenants reported things, including money and jewelry, stolen. James, the guy who screwed up so many times the judge ordered him to leave the city. He was a notorious drunk on a first-name basis with the police. In a good-sized city, that's really bad. He once got busted trying to break into the change boxes on the building's laundry machines. Because of that jerk, the landlords instituted a 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. restriction on the laundry room, which upset everyone. His real quote-unquote achievement was somehow amassing over 30 drunken disorderly/public intoxication charges over a year. He'd somehow get off with maybe a few days in jail, and then get busted again the second he was out. In a coincidence that recurred several times, me and my girlfriend were responsible for him eventually getting his due. We'd gone to a movie and decided we wanted some Burger King, which was only a few minutes walking distance from our building. We walked into Burger King and I swear this is true, found James drunk and climbing onto a table while making really nasty remarks to 2 teenage girls who were just speechless. My girlfriend went over to the table and said, "James, you don't look so good. I'm gonna call someone to make sure you get home safe." This dude goes, "That's nice. You're a real sweetheart, you know that?" Girlfriend calls the cops, who show up and say, "Oh, great. James again," and initially arrest him for another public intoxication. As they're cuffing him, one of the Burger King employees walks over and says to one of the teenage girls, "Are you gonna tell them what happened?" The girl starts crying. Eventually, security footage showed that James had grabbed her breast shortly before we'd walked in. This girl also happened to be 16. On the advice of my girlfriend, the Burger King worker, and her parents, she pressed charges for harassment/assault. This also happened to be the first time James met our new judge, Judge Carroll, a tough, bitter old guy who loved nothing more than giving harsh sentences. He probably ordered champagne and cigars to his chambers when he read James's docket. Not only did he sentence James to 3 years in jail, but ordered that once he was released, he was no longer permitted to maintain a permanent address or dwelling in this city. Leonard. Oh, this dude right here. First off, he talked like a cross between Lil Wayne and the Cajun guy from Joe Dirt. You could barely understand his brutal rasp. It was like trying to have a casual conversation with the singer from Cannibal Corpse. At first, he seemed like a minor inconvenience. He just liked playing his music loud at night. Other residents complained, so he was warned, and hey, no big deal, right? Except his response. It was to go and buy a bigger sound system and play it louder every night, to the point where all of our appliances were shaking and rattling. Me and my girlfriend both worked early, and it became a real issue. My girlfriend started going to bang on his door and warn him personally. He was a tiny guy. She could have really beat his butt if she wanted to. The routine became that she'd warn him, he'd keep doing it, and the police would be called for noise disturbance. It got so bad that our building was labeled a public nuisance by the police, and the owners were fined in addition to Leonard when police needed to be called. Naturally, the owners forwarded their fine onto Leonard's rent, which he barely paid anyway. The clincher came when we decided not to warn him after several months of this crap. This time, the police showed up, knocked on his door, and he yelled, "I'm gonna shoot your butt if you come in here." I guess this was probable cause for them to kick his door down, and they caught him in the middle of smoking some hard drugs. Even better, he rushed the cops and tried to fight them. Yeah, no. He was carried out in handcuffs, shouting nonsense and struggling all the way. According to the public records, he was charged with several counts of drug possession, 1 drug trafficking charge, assault on an officer, and an illegal animal. He had a pit bull, which was illegal in our city, and attacked an officer. Fortunately, one of the responding officers was a canine pro and restrained the dog without injury. The dog was rehomed into a good family several months later. Please, for the love of God, don't try to raise your pets to be weapons, people. And finally, Johnny, the reason we had to leave this building. Johnny was a gay ex-Marine who ran a phone advice hotline for troubled gay teenagers. Early 30s, Hispanic, always seemed like a super nice guy, though a little eccentric. I remember the day like it was yesterday. Me and the girlfriend were planning a nice night at home. She got the food and picked out a couple of horror movies for us to watch. I was at the store getting some booze, and I get a hysterical call from her that opened with, "Our building's on fire." I rush home and, yep, the freaking building was on fire. Johnny, mad about a rent increase, had lit a trash can full of paper towels on fire, and now half the building was engulfed in flames. They rescued all of the pets from the building and did what they could to contain the fire, but in the end, the majority of the apartments were destroyed, and the building was condemned until further notice. The Red Cross paid for our hotels until we could figure crap out, and they were amazing as far as the immediate response went. I can't ever thank them enough for the little stability they gave us during that time. As for Johnny, he was arrested and thrown into a psych ward. He went to the state Supreme Court for trial, found guilty due to mental defect, and will probably spend the rest of his life in a mental ward. So yeah, our building was screwed up. Narrator's commentary. Another absolute monster of a post. And OP's not even a landlord. Just had some absolutely insane neighbors. I was really kind of rooting for James until they got to the end and they're like, yeah, he groped this underage girl. And I'm like, well, not much we can do about that one, huh? At the very least, I hope he's gotten sober now. But like, even when drunk, you can't be going around doing that. That's just, come on, man. Story 20. She brought 3 cats and drama. It was my fault for accepting someone who wanted to keep 3 cats. Surprisingly, none of the trouble stemmed from her pets, which she kept immaculately clean. In fact, it was the cleaning itself that grew out of control. The first few months passed peacefully, no problems. Then she started lagging with her rent. This wouldn't have been a terrible issue since I'm tolerant of a few days late, and maintain a healthy savings buffer for unexpected expenses, vacancies, and late rent checks. It was when I surprised her in the middle of one of her cleaning binges that things began to disintegrate. I had stopped by to grab some supplies in the house for a minor repair or for a monthly inspection. She didn't expect me to appear in the building and was carrying a spray bottle and rag in her hands. Apparently this had been going on for some time. Another tenant warned me of some eccentric behavior she had noticed in her housemate, but didn't go into details. I should have seen the warning signs, but brushed it off at that moment. Her cleaning and reorganizing grew more intense, until it transformed into hostility towards the other tenant who didn't share her intense focus. She insisted that the 3 of us meet to compile a schedule of how and when the other tenant would participate in cleaning of the house. The quote-unquote cleaner rejected any proposals that did not explicitly set an hour and minute, along with the specific cleaning tasks for her housemate. The other housemate found this absurd, and would only agree to a general description of the cleaning tasks. Our negotiations failed to converge on an acceptable schedule, and I had to excuse myself while the cleaner shouted at me to not leave. After that, she bullied the other tenant and patrolled the kitchen anytime her housemate walked through or prepared coffee. Was it an obsession or just a front? She stopped paying rent, and this drama might have just been a distraction to earn extra time out of sympathy. In the end, I had to evict her. Strangely enough, both of them left at the same time, and I think she might have shamed her housemate into footing the bill for her next apartment. Looking back on the whole thing, I'm surprised she didn't find more success in a job where she cleaned houses. It won't make you a billionaire, but it will pay the bills and can always be found, especially in my city. Story 21. Tenant calls for toilet fixing. Got a sword-wielding schizophrenic neighbor tacked onto my list for problems to deal with. Had a tenant call me because the toilet needed a fixing. I came over to check it out. Oh, simple fix. Just needed to run to Home Depot. Then she says there was something else. It was the cross-the-street neighbor, about a 20-year-old male. He apparently had been off his meds and was performing theatrics. A bona fide drama king throughout the night. Yelling, screaming, pacing in and out, slamming the front door. A grade A schizophrenic to my untrained diagnostics. All hours for 3 nights/days ranting. She felt very concerned and nervous. I suggested calling the cops for noise complaints. I took off to Home Depot and got what I needed. I returned to find the guy outside, citing aliens and Queen Elizabeth invading. No biggie. I go inside, fix the toilet, all done. I reassured he seemed harmless. They elevated their concern to feeling threatened. I asked, has he made any threats? They say no. I decide to scope out the fellow. I go outside, made friendly eye contact, a smile, a wave, and a hi. He proceeded to rant directed at me, some absurdities barely acknowledging me, but he did say, "Hey you," as I was walking back into the house. I reassured them of his concerning mental condition, a promise to figure a way to contact his landlord, and advised calling the cops if it went past midnight. I leaved, and there he was on my property ranting like he was in a play. This frightened the girls, so having enough and being Texan, I kindly requested, then kindly advised him to return to his property. He wouldn't acknowledge, so I called the cops for trespassing. Cops show up and he runs inside. He didn't make any direct threats, and the cops had said, well, it's not illegal to be crazy inside your own house. Nothing can be done. Now, the other neighbors are scoping out what's going on with the cops called. I speak with them about the current situation and calm them down. One lady was going to look into mental health hotlines. I pack up because I had a full day's work, as well as after-hours toilet fixing and crazy drama. Things calmed down for a few days. I've never met his landlord, had no contact. Wasn't sure how to reach out, as all I knew the landlord lived in California. I poke around on some public records, glad things were calm and quiet, no real results. Friday approaches and it's SXSW Interactive Festival, and I'm CTO of a VR startup. Our investors are hosting a rooftop event. We have some B-celeb musicians with record label reps, guests, our company, and of course our big donor investors. I'm key central to the tech operation of the event, a bit stressed demoing some hot new finicky tech. I got a call from another neighbor saying that the crazy guy was out ranting, and a jogger passed by and overheard the crazy cry out that he was going to raise the greenhouse down. Jogger stops and says, excuse me? Crazy has gone aggravated and repeats that they're going to raise the greenhouse down. That was my house. And so the jogger informs the neighbor, who called to inform me. Not the best timing, dude. This was one of my major events of the week. I duck out to the bathroom to call the cops again. Fortunately, it was nearing the end of the event, so pack up the tech to the extent that required my attention, informed the party VIPs of my exit, and booked it to my property. 3 cop cars are there, and basically he had ran back inside. Again, not enough to bust in. I speak with everyone, give them the news, my plans for my next steps, and calm them down. Lady looking into mental health got a number but didn't have it on her. Said I'll come back tomorrow, again, exhausted from work and hosting a tech event. She also gave the news that the guy was living alone. He was basically dumped by his mother at that house because she was also not mentally fit to care for herself, let alone him. Crazy running in the family, I guess. The father was a wealthy contractor working in the Middle East, basically disowned him but had the obligations to pay his rent and bills. There was a guy that came by periodically to provide food and make sure he was okay. Great, so the crazy dude had no responsibilities and only had 1 visitor per week. Next day I drive by and see the visitor. I stopped to speak to him, informing him of the ruckus Crazy was causing. Visitor said he's got meds but was beyond his duties to ensure he takes them daily. He shared with me his business card and left swiftly. I go over to the neighbor with the mental health hotline number and said, enough is enough. One more outbreak and we'll call them. After chatting, I'm walking back to my truck. Crazy dude has a 100% legit samurai sword and is swinging it while reciting his theatrics. He stood in the way of my truck. 911 that quick. While on the phone, dude says to end him over and over again, and runs into the house with his sword. Explained the history to the 911 operator and the sword. 5 to 10 cop cars show up in a standoff. I walk to one and he busts out of a trunk what appears to be a shotgun, thinking, great, we're in Texas and they won't tolerate crap. It's about to go down. Dude eventually comes out of the house in his Mad Hatter ways and gets tackled. Thank God, no weapons involved. Cops see the sword on his couch and enter. He gets arrested, and I will say they must have had some mental health training because they handled him with the utmost professional kindness and caring. Much respect to the cops. Things calm down. I calm down the neighbors and tenants. Days go by. Dude turns up again, but more sane. At this point, the girls are seeking to break contract to move away from him. Thanks, buddy. A week goes by and he's starting up again, but soon after, the kid disappears. The last anyone has seen of him was with a rucksack packed up and he was planning on walking into a festival. No festivals I know of going on in the state. He left all of his belongings. His father had autopay going for many, many months. Not my problem. Eventually, new neighbors moved in. Somewhere out there is a schizophrenic kid. I don't think he's of a danger to anyone. I think his banter, sword swinging, and exclamations of ending him was a cry for help. He never threatened anyone. The raise my house down was more likely his Shakespearean theatrics. Poor dude doesn't really have any family, and he's no longer a child under someone else's responsibility. We need better social mental health care in Texas. Hey, I gotta admit, with OP calling him crazy for the entire story, did not expect that last line. Respect to you, OP. Being able to separate his actions from the dude is incredibly impressive. Especially when he was actively raising hell for you specifically. Story 22. My extended family are, or were, landlords. Not sure if they got out of that with the kind of crap you have to deal with sometimes. One story I heard was my uncle was having a conversation with someone outside a flat he was letting to some students. As the two were talking, a couch came crashing out through the front window. I don't know how long that lot stayed after that. The better story is another uncle had a nightmare family staying in a flat he owned. He had to kick them out because they caused nothing but trouble. Their son was sitting exams, so they asked if he could stay until they were finished, and my uncle said sure. Eventually he left and my uncle went to see what damage was done to the flat. He found it immaculate. Everything was clean and tidy, yet something seemed off. He went from room to room but couldn't find so much as a stain. Satisfied with the condition the flat had been left in, he exited a room and went to close the door, and that's when he realized what was wrong. There were no doors anywhere. They had stolen every single interior door. Story 23. I work in property management. I used to work at a high-rise in downtown San Diego. I had a resident who would constantly complain about things that were out of our control, and then ask for a rent credit for his inconvenience. These complaints included too many homeless in the area, the restaurant across the street smells, tired of the dog next door barking when the owners come home, only for a couple of minutes, etc. My personal favorite, where I just went off on him, was when he was parked in front of our building, a designated loading zone, and he received a ticket. This is a public street, mind you, so the only personnel that can give out tickets in the area are the meter maids with the city. He comes in barking at me about this ticket, and asks for reimbursement and an additional credit added to his account due to the emotional stress. I explained to him, it was the city. We have nothing to do with it, and your request is absurd. People will ask for any sort of reimbursement for the stupidest things. Story 24. I rented one of my houses to a gal I worked with. Mother of two, married. Did okay at work. Didn't think much of it. It was my first and last time renting out. I didn't know the laws well for my state. I was very nice in that I was forgiving if rent was a few days late, but she never paid for the deposit, as I was also a student and was busy with school and needed someone in that second home so I didn't have to pay. She took me for a ride, knew all the laws and had to go to court twice. I was lucky in that A, we communicated via text and I saved every message, giving a copy to the judge, and B, her boss wouldn't give her the day off to go to court, so her husband, of whom seemed to also be along for the ride, was stuck trying to defend them not paying. She tried to say I said crap when I didn't, but those messages saved my butt, and luckily they got kicked out with very little damage to the house. Story 25. My family had rentals all throughout my life. By far the worst renters have been my family and friends. My mom's worst was her long-term boyfriend's daughter. Her apartment caught fire and my mom let her rent an old mobile home. Not long after moving in, she almost burned that house down too. She ended up evicting her for non-payment. That same house was rented afterwards by my older sister and she neglected to notify us of any needed repairs. Had to replace the carpet, subfloor, in the whole place. The last renters in my mom's nicest unit ruined brand new laminate with spills, broke a pedestal sink in half, and left pretty much every appliance in non-working order. They even changed the locks without telling us. I vacuumed 3 rooms for 10 hours and the dirt was still coming up. I don't think they ever vacuumed. Story 26. I have an eviction story. I found another veteran Marine on Craigslist that was looking to rent a room in my house. When dealing with Craigslist, I always meet the person several times before they move in so I can get a feel for them. He was very chill and his dog was calm. I gave him the green light. Well, it turned out his dog had severe separation anxiety and barked and scratched constantly until Braden came back. Except Braden is a bartender and would be out of the house for upwards of 12 hours. One time was 2 full days, and he would leave the dog in the house crapping and peeing everywhere. I got fed up and moved the dog to the garage so I could sleep. Now, I have a big boy job. I wake up at 4:45 in the morning to go to work, meaning I expect quiet hours to start at 10 p.m. Well, Braden would come home from bartending at 2 a.m. hammer drunk with several friends and blast music and argue politics. On more than one occasion, I had to pick up broken glass bottles out of my grass from when his girlfriend got mad. The last event was when he threw a party on Monday night where he left the door open to my house where both my cats escaped. In addition, my wallet was rifled through, and he nutted on my ottoman. I broke up the party with an unloaded shotgun. I comped him his rent if he just moved out and didn't make me go to court to get eviction papers drafted. Nut, by the way, never really comes out. OP, I have to disagree with you on that last statement. It clearly had to come out at some point. Story 27. This is a roommate story, but I had a bulimic roommate. My other roomie and I confronted her because she was vomiting in the shared toilet and leaving floating stuff. She told us it's none of our business, but that she would make sure the toilet isn't gross. Fast forward a few weeks later, and something stinky was coming from her room when she was out of town. We went in and found two totes. You know, those big containers you store your winter clothes or Christmas ornaments in and put in the attic, full of vomit. One of them was duct taped shut. Our landlord had to come remove them. I remember it was on Halloween because he kept saying, "It's Halloween and I'm going to be digging a hole somewhere to bury this." That has to be some landlord's worst story. Story 28. My dad rents commercial property in our hometown, a third world country. In the early 2000s, a Chinese man rented a supermarket-style property from him. My dad went to collect rent every now and then and didn't notice anything too strange at first, except a lot of customers. From his perspective, great. But then he noticed some structures at the back of the building, and these structures start to move to the front. Upon inspection, he realizes the tenant had vertically divided the supermarket into 2 floors using zinc panels. Something dodgy was clearly going on. He asked him to leave, and when he wouldn't, he threatened to call the police. By the time he came back with the police, they had left. He climbed to the makeshift second floor to find dozens of towel beds, clothes, including children's, etc. The police presumed the landlord was trafficking Chinese people, and this is where they were living. There were also 2 big pots with broth, which when emptied revealed 2 dog corpses. Story 29. I began my landlording career pretty young. I took out a master lease on a house and rented out the rooms individually. Over time, I developed a process and way of handling people that severely limited bad tenants, but in the beginning, my first tenant in one of the rooms was apparently in town for a construction project. He said he just needed me to fill out a form and his company would send the rent checks. I had vacancy already, so I had to move in right away without paying a deposit first, just trusting what he said. The first day, I'm cleaning a shelf in the kitchen and it shatters when I drop it. He's in the middle of moving his stuff in and says, "Hey, my company is a glass cutting company. Let me get the measurements and I'll have them cut it." I'm all, "Sure, how much does it cost?" So now I have someone in my house who hasn't given me any money yet, and I'm giving him $40. A month goes by and I haven't gotten any rent yet, and this glass shelf thing is never happening. Spoiler, never got any money. So that's not so bad. Crap happens and I goofed, clearly. But then my other tenants' things begin to go missing. They're eventually coming to me asking what the hell is up. I'm thinking they probably just misplaced it and I put it off. Eventually I talk to the guy and he's not coming clean, etc. I really don't know what to do at this point, so I just do nothing and hope the problem goes away. Thankfully, one of the tenants just took the initiative and called the police. The guy had a warrant out for his arrest or something or other, so they had no problem coming and evicting him without standard landlord-tenant board stuff. After he was gone, the 3 of us went into his room while his stuff was still there to see if we could recover any stolen goods. In it, we found a crap load of drugs, including prescription drugs obtained with all the stolen IDs he had hidden in a box, including my other tenants, a bunch of door and window hardware pieces and tools clearly used for break-and-enters/theft, keys to my tenant's Lexus. He had basically demoed the walls of his room and installed all kinds of crappy wire shelving everywhere to store all his junk. He had those super pain-in-the-butt stickers, etc. everywhere. He also knew what the score was, for sure. His laptop was on when we came in, and it was listening into the police scanner stuff to pick up calls. So overall, a pathological liar who stole a bunch of crap, wrecked the place, and never paid rent. Though, really, that's not even so bad. I lost out on 2 months' rent. I mean, I was an idiot, obviously, and I had to put putty up on the walls and paint the room. I feel like it's not all that bad. Lessons I've learned from this and other experiences that keep things orderly now. Never sign a lease without deposit. Duh. If someone has a lot of excuses, let it go. Find a different person. If someone starts overselling themselves, it's almost always a bad thing. Those are the people that never do any of what they say they will. Kind of like that friend or family member who always talks about starting a business or whatever, but just sits around playing WoW. It's better to have your unit vacant for a month than to rent to someone you're not super confident in, and advertise the unit for above market rates and just do more showings. You'll get the people who have enough money to buy luxury things. People with money are almost always better tenants for a variety of reasons. Story 30. My wife and I help manage my father-in-law's rental properties. Once I had a tenant let her sister move into her house for a weekend visit. That Monday, the tenant moved back in with her estranged husband and the sister stayed. After a month of normal payments, the tenant missed a payment, so I messaged the tenant and was told, "I don't live here anymore. My sister has a key and won't leave. Sorry." Where I live, squatters cannot be kicked out of a house. It must go through a judge after 3 billing periods of non-payment. The landlord must pay the court costs, and the squatters still have a minimum of 1 billing period to get their items out of the house. Luckily, we have a billing cycle of 1 week, so we were able to get them out rather quickly. Story 31. First day I moved into my apartment last year, my landlord told me about the worst kid to ever live there. He told us there was this kid subletting an apartment over the summer for his rather shy sister. No problems. The sister was normal, and he came with good recommendations. However, on the first night there, he threw a rager of a party. Loud music, Too many people didn't end until the police needed to be called for noise violations. The next morning, my landlord comes up and tells him that get-togethers are fine, but parties of that scale, not allowed. It was in the lease he signed, but he was willing to give the kid another chance. Bad decision. A more violent party this time with property damage to boot. Landlord stormed up there and told him to have his crap out of the apartment by tomorrow at noon. Kid was mad and decided to throw a getting evicted party. Got about 5 of his friends in there to trash the place and break everything they could find. They punched holes in the walls, broke lights, and smashed the windows. It all came to a grinding halt when the kid decides to headbutt a hole in the wall and hit a supporting metal beam, breaking his neck. The kid got charged with absolutely everything. The girls who lived there previously were politely told not to return the next year, and the kid missed his freshman year of university and $10,000 worth of scholarships because he couldn't leave the hospital or move independently. My landlord pretty well told me, as long as I don't do anything that stupid, we'll probably get along. Commentary. Look, man, you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. Why would you headbutt a wall ever? Come on, I don't know even what to say. Also, throwing a party specifically to destroy everything because you're getting kicked out because you're a garbage tenant, it just sounds like the most entitled behavior I've ever heard. Story 32. We had a tenant who lived in a shared apartment room for a few months. His flatmate was complaining about smells and cleanliness issues. When we checked, everything seemed sort of normal. Very messy, but nothing extraordinary. After the guy failed to pay his rent again, we evicted him. One day before the eviction date, I sat with him, and we agreed that he could leave some heavy furniture in the room to be picked up a few weeks later, but the room needs to be otherwise cleaned out, and he has to hand over the keys. He agreed that he would be able in the following morning. Well, the next day he did not give the keys back in the morning, and his room door was locked. I texted him and he claimed he had forgotten to return the keys and took them with him. I explicitly asked if the room was cleared out except for the furniture, and he wrote, yes. I fetched the spare key and opened the door, and to my disbelief, the room was not cleared out. At first, I only noticed about 8 plastic shopping bags on the ground, a lot of rubbish, including rubbish bags lying around openly with actual trash in them, dirty dishes all over the place, especially on the table, a lot of personal items still flying around. At first, it seemed his room was so messy that he simply couldn't finish cleaning it up, and had to leave after starting. Since the room was supposed to be rented to another person a few weeks later, luckily I already expected some troubles and postponed this, I had to start cleaning it up. Then the real horror came to light. The plastic bags were filled with plastic bottles, and in those, you guessed it, was urine. There were about 30 or 40 of them, each containing about 1 or 1.5 liters of urine. The dishes were also awful. They had been standing around for several weeks, at least as far as I could tell by the smell and larvae in them. The least problematic dishes, quote-unquote, only had mold or fungi on them. Opening the wardrobe, it was clear that he had stored wet clothes in it. The whole thing was already falling apart, and solid wooden boards were just bending from their own weight. The wall behind the wardrobe was full of mold. Luckily, only on the wallpaper surface, otherwise this could have been really expensive. Under the table was some spilled food on the carpet, which was moldy as well. The same for under the bed, which apparently he had 2 king-sized mattresses on. The stench was really strange, a mix of all the dirtiness in the room and some scented candles or room spray or something. It took me and 2 other people about 3 to 4 hours to superficially clean the room out. It took another few days of a few hours work each to renew and clean up the whole room. Mold removal, wallpapers, carpet, cleaning doors and windows. We never saw anything of the rent that was still due, and the guy even had the audacity to threaten to sue us. Also found out that he apparently had very high debt everywhere, so suing ourselves would not bring money back. We got really careful after this with our tenants. Story 33. My parents. First off, we were evicted from every house we lived in. As a kid, I didn't understand this. It was likely a combination of missing rent, garbage piling up, neighbors complaining about no one ever cleaning up dog crap, noise complaints, drugs, etc. When I was 12, my grandparents let us move into their rental. When I was 21, we were evicted. Don't get me wrong, it was the best thing to ever happen to me. I grew up immediately and never looked back. My parents stopped paying rent shortly after we moved in. My grandmother let it slide because she was looking out for me. I had no idea about this until I was much older. When I turned 18, my mom said I had to start paying my quote-unquote share of the rent, $200. I didn't know she was pocketing it until I started paying my grandmother directly. When we finally moved out, I packed all of my crap in a moving van and went to an apartment. My parents did not. They left 90% of everything they owned in the house, but they didn't leave it neat. It was like they threw a tantrum and spewed almost everything they owned around the house. Water damage, wall damage, garbage everywhere. I told my grandparents I would help clean with a couple of friends that had stayed with me at that house for various lengths. My grandparents rented a giant container/dumpster to put everything in. Not a regular dumpster, but like a modified shipping container. Over the course of 3 days, my friends and I filled it about 2/3. My parents are smokers. When we started removing things from the walls, we could see the ridiculous color change from smoke-stained walls to the places pictures had been hung. In my parents' room, there was a wooden heart my mom used as a jewelry rack. It had various nails in it for pegs. It was nailed to the wall with 27 nails. We counted. It was maybe a foot in diameter. Most of the drywall was destroyed. What wasn't had to be painted over. My grandparents said they spent well over $10,000 in 1999 for repairs for their own kid. As of now, they own nothing from their past. They had a storage unit at one point that had the remainder of their belongings. They didn't make payments and everything is gone, including pictures from my childhood and my ridiculous collection of Christmas ornaments from my grandmother. I should add a demolition crew came in and filled the rest of the dumpster on days 4 and 5. OP, no offense, but growing up with parents like that, it is a wonder you turned out all right. I can't imagine your parents pocketing money that they claim is used for rent. What weird, gross behavior. I hope you're doing well and have distanced yourself from them as much as humanly possible. Anyway, that is the last story for today. I would like to thank you all so much for watching. And for now, I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are. I will see you in the next one.